Hey everybody, and welcome to the channel. My name is Hack. In this video, we'll be talking about weapon skills in Amazon's new MMORPG called New World. Now, in this game, there are no classes, no world skills, or guild skill lines at all. So everything you can do in the game combat-wise in New World is going to come from these 7 weapon skill trees. Any character can use any weapon at any level, and you can equip up to 3 weapons and swap between them for more build diversity. Also, each weapon has multiple skill trees you can focus your playstyle on even further. In this video, we're covering every single weapon skill line in New World, including both active and passive skills, and we'll be breaking down some of the best skills and combos I've found so you can start planning your build now for the game's release. So let's get started. Let's kick things off with the WARHAMMER, which was the only two-handed weapon available for testing during this latest preview. Though more two-handed weapons, including the axe and greatsword, are likely coming to the game later on, the WARHAMMER excels in AoE damage and crowd control. First, you have the Shockwave ability, an AoE ground pound style skill that's going to stun enemies in an area for 2 seconds while also doing pretty strong AoE damage. Next, you have Path of Destiny, another ground-based attack that deals damage out in a line in front of you. This is a very powerful skill as well, though the cooldown is pretty long. Then you've got the Clear Out ability, a full-on face slam with the hammer that's going to send your enemy flying across the map. Pretty fun skill to use, and the cooldown is not too bad. This brings us to the Block Breaker skill, which is pretty good against tankier enemies in the game. Basically, with this skill, you can make them drop block, making them open to another attack from you or your group. We've got Wrecking Ball, another powerful skill that does multiple attacks in a straight line in front of you. And I think this is going to be better when attacking structures in PvP, because in PvE against enemies that are moving around, it's easy to get stuck in place and not actually do any damage. Finally, we've got Mighty Gavel, the two-handed leap attack that crushes down enemies in front of you. It's going to be great for that mini gap closer and also doing AoE damage at the same time. The two-handed WARHAMMER does have some pretty good passives, I would say, both for tanking and crowd control. With this weapon, you're going to be focused a lot on stunning enemies, and in fact, your passives do more once an enemy is stunned. For example, Sitting Duck, this is going to give you extra bonus damage to stunned enemies. And then the Stunned Extinction passive, this actually gives you bonus resists and makes it so none of your attacks can be interrupted for 12 seconds, which is actually a really strong buff. So again, if you like getting up close and personal, if you want a build that can do a lot of CC and a lot of damage, check out the WARHAMMER. Next, we have the Sword and Shield weapon style, which is a really solid choice both for PvE and PvP. The Whirling Blade attack, this is great for AoE, hitting all nearby enemies and pushing them back. Then one of my favorite abilities here, Leaping Strike, that is a pretty strong gap closer, covering a lot of ground with this one and also stunning your enemy. Reverse Stab is actually strong if you can land it. This does have a longer animation cast time, so you might get interrupted or the enemy might dodge, but if everything hits, this is a lot of damage. Then you've got Shield Bash. This is a great single target stun. This is going to stop your enemies in their tracks for 2 seconds, letting you line up your next combo, which is pretty nice. We've got a great defensive skill in Final Stand. It's going to reduce all incoming damage for 10 seconds, plus more with some of our passives. And the damage reduction you get is actually based on your missing health. Keep in mind, this does have a long cooldown, but this can be great when you're overrun by a lot of enemies. And then finally, Shield Rush. This is another gap closer that's going to knock down your target. Honestly, I hope they rework this because I feel like the Leaping Strike is a better gap closer. I'm not sure why you would use this one, actually. In terms of passives, you want to think of Sword and Shield as both your kind of tank and your brawler style builds in New World. For example, you'll have a lot more health with passives like Bladed Fortitude. You also have a lot of blocking defense, like increased mitigation while blocking ranged and melee attacks. Sword and Shield builds are also going to be really great for party gameplay. You do have some group buffs, for example, Leadership. This is going to increase all of your group's damage output by 10%. So all in all, a really nice play style, great for PvE and PvP. Definitely one of my favorites so far. Our next weapon skill line is the Hatchet, which was definitely one of the most popular weapon skills during the preview event. And it's one of my favorites as well. This skill line is extremely flexible and it provides good options for both ranged and melee combat. Now, speaking of ranged combat, the Aimed Throw skill, this is definitely one of my favorites. This is an axe throw that you can use at medium range for free. You don't need ammo of any kind for this. This is great because each throw does a slight knockback, and you can get up to 3 axes thrown in a row. Power throw is also another very strong ability, again ranged for a big burst of damage plus that knockback. I like combining this with my aim throws for even more damage. Quick throw, not a huge fan of this. It is a very fast thrown axe attack, but it is also the weakest, so I tend not to use this one. Now, Berserk is a very interesting ability. This makes Hatchet builds extremely strong in some situations. Basically, you'll have increased damage on your character every time you take damage. Then we've got Sprint Attack, another gap closer style ability, another one of my favorites. After I do a few aimed throws, I'll usually put this into a combo just to close the distance between me and the enemy and do even more damage. Finally, Purge. I did not get a chance to use this very much, but it seems like an interesting skill. It's going to remove all the debuffs that you have on your character and also give you short-term immunity to debuffs. This could be really nice against some enemies that have poison or bleed effects. Like I said, in terms of passives, these are very strong. Great for solo and group play, especially on the solo side. Rejuvenating kills, you do get health back every time you kill an enemy. This is great if you're out adventuring on your own. And we talked about that Berserker skill tree. Once you have this maxed out, you do have a short window of immortality. Pretty nice for some of those tougher boss fights. So if you like that in-your-face Berserker play style, definitely check out the Hatchet. Like I said, it's great for the early game as well because of the mix of ranged and melee skills. Bow is our first fully ranged weapon in New World, and it's another great all-around choice. If you want to play that tactical, ranger, or assassin type build, keep in mind too that every attack in New World is aimed and not tab targeted, so you do actually need to be a good shot to make a bow build work for you. Our first ability is Rapid Shot. This fires 3 quick arrows in a row. And keep in mind this is a channeled attack, and the last arrow especially can take a little bit longer to land, so you do need to make sure there's space between you and your target if you want to pull this off. Then we have Evasive Shot. This is a great option, by the way, to increase the distance. Once your enemy is getting closer, you're actually going to leap back in the air, fire off a single shot, and stagger your enemy. We've got Penetrating Shot, one of the most damaging bow skills already. What's interesting about this is it can actually hit multiple targets if they're lined up in front of you, though you do have some reduced damage on each enemy after the fact. In terms of group utility, we actually have a Smoke Bomb. Now, I don't think this will be especially useful in PvE against the enemies in the world. For PvP, definitely a nice option here. Our last 2 abilities are more AoE focused. You do have Rain of Arrows. This, I think, would be good for area control PvP matches. And then we do have Spread Shot. This can actually be incredibly powerful based on how you aim it. If you get multiple arrows to hit the same target, that's definitely a lot of damage. In terms of passives, Bow is pretty interesting. It actually does require a lot of skill, I think. And it's going to reward you for that. For example, giving you more damage for headshots, and even a snare or a slowing effect if you hit the enemy in their legs. So if you want a tactical build where you really need to think first, instead of just spamming left click over and over, I definitely would recommend Bow. Once you get used to it, it's definitely a lot of fun to play. Now onto our other range option, which is going to be the musket. I think it's currently somewhat underpowered in the game, so it probably will not be your main weapon, but it can definitely make for some interesting support builds, and you might want to think about this as your second option. Speaking of support, if you like traps and bombs, then definitely check out the musket. We can set traps on the ground. These are nice because they slow down the target for a few seconds. And with higher passive ranks, you can actually set multiple traps. Then you've also got a Sticky Bomb, which has a 5-second timer. Again, great for trapping an enemy. If you have them in a confined area, you can do a lot of AoE damage with that one. Now, in terms of utility, I do like this skill, Hunter's Vision. This can be nice for seeing enemies in tall grass or at nighttime, though I'm not sure this is actually worth a full skill slot, in my opinion. Now, in terms of our actual musket, like bullet firing abilities, Shooter's Stance is pretty good if you start this from max range, because it's going to give you at least 3 quick hits with a faster reload time. Then we do have Power Shot, where you overload your musket. This causes your next shot to do 25% more damage. Pretty good overall. And then finally, one of the most interesting skills in the game, you might consider running musket just for this ability by itself. That's the Play Dead skill. Basically, it's just how it sounds. You drop dead on the ground, dropping all the aggro from any enemies in the area. I think this is pretty good, especially with some of the passives. For example, the Reset passive. you reset all of your skill cooldowns after using Play Dead. That's actually a fantastic thing for this game. And then I just want to point out you do have some sniper capabilities, enhanced zoom, enhanced headshot damage, similar to the bow. So if you're looking for something with slightly more utility, again, I don't think this will be your primary weapon, but as a backup weapon, this could be a solid option both for PvE and PvP. So we're getting into the magical weapons now, starting off with the Fire Staff. This is a tough weapon to use early on because of its lack of mobility, but in later game and PvP, this is a very strong option. With Incinerate, you have a quick AoE of fire damage. This looks great, and the AoE damage is huge if you have multiple enemies lined up. And speaking of melee range, we do have the Flamethrower ability, which basically looks and acts exactly like you'd think it would, burning victims with a breath of fire that comes straight out of your staff. Pretty cool looking and very effective in terms of overall damage. Let's talk about the burnout skill. Probably one of the more disappointing skills in the Fire Staff skill line. This is basically a flame dash attack charging forward. Very long upfront channel time to make this go off. For basically very little effect, you have some ground-based AoE damage. So not a huge fan of that one. Though our other ground-based attacks are actually very strong. Pillar of Fire. This is a big burst of flame damage with a relatively short cooldown, so you'll be able to get this off quicker. And then one of my absolute favorite skills, Meteor Shower. You can see this is just a punishing amount of AoE damage. Definitely a strong ability for sure if you can get enemies grouped up in a single area. And then finally, Siege of Fire. This ability has absolutely insane range. This will be strong for like PvP sieges, doing damage from a safe distance. It has a solid radius and also staggers enemies in place, so really nice ability, though there is quite a long channel. So make sure you are protected if you try to use this skill. Fire Staff obviously has more magic-focused passives. For example, you can increase your overall magic pool by 10%. That's the Summoner's Gift. And then you have some interesting group passives as well. If you have multiple fire mages in your group, then the Fire God passive is going to increase all of your damage by 10%. Like I said, this is an interesting option for a playstyle. I think it still needs to be balanced. Hopefully, we'll see some improvements in later previews. The lack of mobility is pretty tough, but if you're in a group that can help protect you, this is one of the strongest weapons in the game. Last but not least, let's talk about the Life Staff, which of course is the primary option for healers in New World, though the skill line also does a surprising amount of damage. Speaking of damage, the Smite ability, probably one of my favorites in this skill line. This is a strong burst of AoE damage that also staggers enemies. Very powerful and effective. In terms of utility, Speed of Light is definitely one of the most used abilities. This can be used for easier travel between objectives and also just getting out of trouble. It's a great option both for PvE and PvP just to create some space. And we've got a surprisingly powerful skill in the Siphon ability. This is essentially a damage over time that doesn't cost anything to cast, and it actually restores your magic pool. Onto our healing skills, we have some ground-based AoE heals that are going to be fine for you and your group. For example, Healing Pulse. This is basically a ground-based heal over time. Then Divine Embrace. This is not a heal over time. This is actually a burst heal. This will cost you more to cast, but it can be a very strong heal when you need it for emergencies. Then finally, I just want to point out the Shield ability. This will protect everybody in your area from projectiles. I did not get a chance to use this very much. I would say it's probably going to be better in PvP. Where you have a lot of incoming range damage. Of course, being the healer-focused playstyle, we do have some related passives. I think Resuscitate is absolutely amazing. Basically, bring yourself back to life once every 15 minutes. And then you can also get a free damage shield on top of that with Ancient Guardian. So overall, definitely recommend the Life Staff. I did level this up on all of my characters during the preview, and it's definitely worth it. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up our video on every current weapon in New World, as well as the best skills and passives for each skill line. Now, the first preview event did just end, but don't worry, there will be more previews coming up in the next few months, and hopefully more weapons. We have heard rumors, for example, of a two-handed Great Axe, two-handed Great Sword, also possibly more staffs for more magic skill lines, including like shock damage, maybe even ice damage. So if that does happen, I'll try to put out a new video explaining all those skill lines. So if you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on social media as well. I'll be putting out information there as it comes out. I also have a website, hacktheminotaur.com. I'll have my written versions, putting these weapon skills in more detail if you're interested in checking that out as well. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.